Tonight, we drift back to a land where heat shimmers off dusty roads and the smell of spices and smoke floats through crowded markets. You hear the creak of wooden carts, the low murmur of traders haggling under fading sun, and somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic clang of a temple bell. This is India in the early 18th century, vast and varied, where kingdoms still hold sway and empires rise and fall like tides. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You wander into the 1700s, where the British East India Company, technically just a trading company, is quietly planting its roots deeper into the soil of the subcontinent. At first, they come with the appearance of humble merchants, sipping tea while counting coins, but don't be fooled. Their ships carry cannons and their ledgers hide strategies sharper than swords. You watch them secure trading rights from Mughal emperors, first in Bengal, then elsewhere, and you notice how their factories slowly morph into fortified settlements. Over decades, as Mughal power wanes, the company's influence swells like a snake basking in the sun until it's ready to strike. You hear the whispers of locals who realize they are no longer trading with equals but with overlords in waiting. A quirky tidbit catches your ear to impress Indian princes. Company officials sometimes donned elaborate Mughal-style robes only to return to stiff English suits when the contracts were signed, chameleons in power suits centuries before the term existed. Historians still argue whether the company's dominance was a carefully plotted takeover, or just opportunistic moves falling like dominoes as India's old structures weakened. But you can't ignore the Battles Plassey in 1757, where a handful of British troops and a lot of treachery flipped Bengal's fortunes overnight. You picture Robert Clive, not a king nor a prince, but a company man standing victorious over a province that would bankroll Britain's empire for decades. Taxes rise, crops shift, to feed Europe's hunger for indigo and opium, and local weavers watch their looms fall silent as cheap British textiles flood markets. You hear the muted anger of artisans losing livelihoods, the soft cry of peasants facing famine while granaries stay full for export. Railways and telegraphs will come later, but already the company is laying invisible tracks of control, connecting profit to power. As years pass, you sense the changing air. Indian soldiers, sepoys fill British ranks fighting battles from Burma to Afghanistan, yet they remain second class in their own land. The company enforces laws in English, collects revenue with an iron hand, and builds a bureaucracy where Indians climb only so high before the ceiling stops them cold. You glance at Calcutta once, just a trading post, now a capital, buzzing with clerks and colonial pomp. Even as British culture seeps into cities, blending awkwardly with Indian traditions, resentment simmers beneath the surface. You notice how missionaries preach Christianity while officials claim to civilize, and you can't help but smirk at the irony, bringing enlightenment while plundering the wealth that once dazzled the world. By the early 19th century, reforms come in trickles. The abolition of sati, the practice where widows were burned on their husbands' pyres, is enforced by Governor-General Bentinck. And while many cheer this progress, others resent the foreign interference in their customs. The British say they're saving lives, locals accuse them of eroding culture. The tension is palpable, like a storm cloud refusing to burst just yet. Amid this, a young clerk named Ram Mohan Roy emerges advocating for modern education, women's rights, and an India that can blend tradition with progress. His voice is not a roar, but a ripple that will grow. As you close your eyes, you see the empire tightening its grip, not with one dramatic move, but with countless small turns of the screw. Fort by fort, law by law, tax by tax, India is no longer a land of many rulers, but a colony in the making, its destiny slowly slipping into foreign hands. The company may fly a flag with stripes and a cross, but behind it the Union Jack is waiting, and with it the long night of British rule begins to fall. You move forward into the mid-19th century, where the air smells faintly of gunpowder sweat and something brewing that no one can quite name yet. The British East India Company still reigns supreme, but cracks are forming in its carefully built walls of control. You walk past sepoy barracks, rows of Indian soldiers drilling under the hot sun, uniforms, stiff eyes, watchful. These men, recruited from villages and towns, fight Britain's wars, but eat Britain's rations, follow Britain's orders, and swallow their pride when treated as lesser beings. One day, whispers spread like wildfire. The new Enfield rifle cartridges are greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to Hindus and Muslims alike. You hear the hushed conversations at night, sepoys torn between orders and faith, loyalty and dignity. A small thing you might think just cartridges, but in colonial India, small things spark wildfires. You step into May 1857 in the garrison town of Meerut, where tensions snap. Sepoys refuse the cartridges, are punished brutally, and then under the moonlight their comrades rise in rebellion. Guns fire, swords flash, and suddenly the mutiny spreads like a contagion across northern India. You watch towns light up with revolt, civilians join soldiers, and the cry of freedom, Maro Firangi Ko. Kill the foreigner pierces the night air. Delhi is captured, and the aged Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, more poet than king, is declared as symbolic leader of the uprising. For a brief flickering moment it feels like the old India is clawing back its soul. But rebellion is messy. Villages burn, loyalties split, and not everyone joins the fight. Some remain loyal to the British. Others stay silent out of fear. You notice princely states calculating their chances, some siding with rebels, others waiting to see which way the wind blows. Historians still argue whether this was India's first war of independence, or just a mutiny born out of military grievances. For you, standing amid the chaos, labels don't matter. The streets run with the sweat of peasants, the tears of widows, and the smoke of homes burned to the ground. The British retaliate with a fury that chills your spine. You see cannons blasting rebel strongholds, entire neighborhoods leveled as punishment, and civilians hanged from trees as examples. Cities like Kanpur and Lucknow become scenes of both heroism and horror, with sieges dragging on, supplies dwindling, and atrocities piling up on both sides. The company's officers, hardened and furious, vow to crush the uprising without mercy. Somewhere in Delhi, the poet King Zafar writes verses about the death of his dynasty, even as he is exiled to Burma after the rebellion is stamped out. The red threads of his poetry mix with the red stains on the streets. In the aftermath, the landscape feels eerily silent. The rebellion is defeated, but the world has shifted. The British Crown looks at the company with disgust, the mismanagement, the near collapse, the bloodbath, and decides enough is enough. In 1858, the East India Company has dissolved its powers, handed directly to the British government. You watch the Union Jack rise more prominently than ever as Queen Victoria becomes Empress of India. The colonial machine grows colder, more bureaucratic, and somehow even more suffocating. A quirky detail stays with you. In the wake of the revolt, British officials suddenly become obsessed with controlling symbols, banning certain songs, rewriting school curricula, and even regulating how Indians could hold public gatherings. They fear not just weapons, but words, ideas, and the possibility that rebellion might sprout again from the smallest seed. You imagine clerks sweating over dusty files, stamping approval or denial on petitions, as if paper alone could keep an empire safe. And yet, the rebellion leaves something behind. For the first time, many Indians, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, have fought side by side, even if briefly, against a common oppressor. Stories of valor circulate in whispers. Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi riding into battle, fearless and defiant. Kunwar Singh, the aging leader, fighting until his last breath. Nameless farmers who picked up whatever they could to defend their land. These tales refuse to die, even as the British tighten control. You realize that while the uprising failed militarily, it planted an idea, a dangerous idea, that India could rise again. As you drift through this smoke-filled aftermath, you feel a strange mixture of defeat and defiance in the air. The British Raj has begun built not on the fragile greed of a company, but on the cold steel of an empire. Yet beneath the silence you sense that the soil of India remembers. It remembers the cries of 1857, the blood of rebels, and the poetry of a dethroned emperor. And like seeds buried deep, the memory of resistance waits quietly for its next season to bloom. You drift onward into the decades after 1857, where the rebellion's embers have cooled but not entirely died, and the new British Raj stretches its polished boots across the land. The company is gone, but its ghost lingers in every tax office and dusty barrack, while Queen Victoria's officials march in with promises of reform and justice, as if draping velvet over chains makes them lighter. You stroll through newly built railways glinting under the sun, iron tracks cutting through fields like scars carrying goods out to ports faster than ever before. To the British, these trains are progress. To many Indians, they are symbols of extraction, carrying wealth away while famine creeps closer to home. You watch peasants forced to grow cash crops, indigo, cotton, opium, while food prices soar and granaries are locked. When famine hits, as it does repeatedly in the late 1800s, millions starve, while British officials debate relief policies over tea. Historians still argue whether these famines were natural disasters or the grim result of imperial priorities that valued exports over human lives. As you walk through bustling colonial cities, you notice how the Raj reshapes India's urban heartbeats. Calcutta, Bombay, Madras cities where Victorian architecture towers over crowded alleys where British clubs bar Indians, and where the smell of curry mixes with the scent of English roses in manicured gardens. The Raj prides itself on order, on railways, telegraphs, legal codes, and English education, all while ensuring that the highest rungs of power remain exclusively white. You overhear Indian clerks in offices fluent in English but stuck in junior roles drafting documents that control their own people. They begin to think, to question, to dream. Among them, new voices rise: social reformers, writers, and early politicians who see a different future. You catch sight of Dadabhai Naoroji, often called the Grand Old Man of India, as he calculates the drain of wealth, how Britain siphons riches from India year after year. His arguments echo in educated circles, unsettling the colonial narrative of benevolence. At the same time, Swami Vivekananda steps onto a global stage, robes flowing, speaking in Chicago about the dignity of Indian culture, shaking Western assumptions that India is only a land to be ruled. These voices are quiet but persistent, like the hum of a swarm that's gathering strength. Meanwhile, the British craft laws and policies that tighten control, yet they cannot fully control the human spirit. You stumble upon a small gathering of Indians forming the Indian National Congress in 1885. At first, their demands are mild representation, better treatment, small reforms. The British smile politely as if indulging children, but the seed is planted. The Congress debates petitions in English suits and turbans, blending in the halls, but beneath their politeness lies a growing sense of injustice. You can almost hear the rustle of change moving through the pages of their resolutions. A quirky tidbit surfaces in this era. British officials become oddly obsessed with hunting tigers, posing for photos with their kills as symbols of dominance, while Indian peasants quietly curse them for upsetting the balance of nature. These photographs, meant to show control over the wild, instead reveal the arrogance of an empire believing it can tame everything: land, people, even animals. Not everything is rebellion or reform. Life continues with its own rhythm. Festivals still light up the nights, temples still echo with chants, and the monsoon still paints fields green. Yet you sense that something fundamental is shifting. Education spreads among the middle-class, newspapers emerge in English and regional languages, and ideas travel faster than before. Indians begin to discuss not just grievances but rights. They start to imagine themselves not as subjects but as citizens. You walk past a school where young boys read Shakespeare in the morning and listen to their grandmothers tell stories of Ramayana at night. This duality, modern education mixed with ancient roots, creates a generation that can navigate both worlds and perhaps someday challenge the one that rules them. British officials, smug in their belief of eternal control, do not notice how this educated class is slowly weaving the fabric of nationalism. As the 19th century wanes, you stand on the threshold of a new century and feel the Raj at its height, railways humming, officials marching cities, bustling under Union Jack flags. But you also feel a quiet tremor, as if the earth itself knows that empires rise only to fall. The British believe they have brought order. The people know they have lost freedom. And somewhere in that tension, in that simmering silence, the first sparks of a new fire wait for their moment to leap into flame. You move gently into the dawn of the 20th century, where the British Raj stands tall and proud on the surface, but underneath currents of nationalism ripple like an unseen tide. You wander through crowded bazaars where shopkeepers now sell more than goods, they sell ideas. Newspapers pass from hand to hand, each article a quiet rebellion wrapped in ink. You hear speeches in small town halls, sometimes cautious, sometimes fiery, as Indians debate how to reclaim their voice. The Indian National Congress, once content with polite petitions, begins to stir with bolder demands. You watch leaders like Gopal Krishna Gokhale argue for gradual reform, while Bal Gangadhar Tilak roars that Swaraj is my birthright, igniting crowds with a fervour that even the stiffest British officer cannot ignore. You notice that change does not come only from politics, but from culture itself. You walk through a street where people boycott British cloth, spinning their own khadi and burning foreign goods in protest. The air smells of smoke and pride as Swadeshi, the movement for self-reliance, takes root. In Bengal, the partition of 1905 splits the province in two, not just geographically but emotionally, as the British claim administrative efficiency, while Indians see a deliberate attempt to divide Hindus and Muslims. You feel the outrage in every rally, hear patriotic songs sung with trembling voices, and see British goods tossed into flames. A quirky little detail slips through British-made salt. Once mundane, becomes a symbol of oppression, so hated that people would rather scrape salt from the earth than buy it. Historians still argue whether the partition of Bengal was a clumsy mistake or a calculated strategy to fracture unity, but you don't need a historian to feel the heat rising. The protests grow loud enough that the British eventually reverse the partition in 1911, a rare retreat that shows even the empire can bend under pressure. Yet the reversal does not heal the wounds, it deepens the belief that unity is power, and division is the empire's greatest weapon. As you stroll deeper into this era, you meet figures who will shape the soul of the movement. Rabindranath Tagore writes poetry that makes hearts swell songs that later become national anthems. Annie Besant, a British woman turned Indian nationalist, campaigns for home rule, proving that resistance can cross boundaries of birth. Moderates argue for negotiation, extremists call for confrontation, and somewhere in the middle, a new voice is forming, a voice that will soon redefine the struggle itself. You can almost hear the distant footsteps of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi returning from South Africa, carrying with him the philosophy of Satyagraha, truth force, where resistance is non-violent but relentless. Not yet the Mahatma, he is still just a lawyer experimenting with ideas, but those ideas will soon sweep across the subcontinent like a soft yet unstoppable wind. For now, the Congress is still divided between those who sip tea with British officials and those who would rather throw the tea into the harbour, metaphorically speaking, of course. Meanwhile, the British Raj, ever watchful, introduces reforms here and there, councils, limited representation, crumbs tossed to quiet the noise. But you can tell it's too little too late. The people's appetite has grown beyond crumbs. They want the whole feast of freedom. You pass a group of students chanting slogans, their voices young but fierce, and you sense they will not stop at half measures. They read revolutionary pamphlets under lantern light, whispering names like Aurobindo and Savarkar, men who believe freedom might need more than petitions. Through all this, life continues in its strange duality. The same trains that carry soldiers also carry protesters. The same English schools that teach obedience also teach the language of dissent. British officials still ride in carriages believing the empire eternal, while a silent storm gathers behind them. And in the villages where most of India still lives, people begin to hear these whispers of change, carried by travellers' songs and the occasional brave speech under a banyan tree. You feel the temperature rising, not just the heat of the sun, but the heat of something larger, something unstoppable. India is no longer just a colony, it is a nation waking up from a long imposed sleep. The British sense it too, which is why they tighten their grip even more, passing laws that curb speech and imprison leaders. But as every handcuff clicks shut, another heart opens to the dream of Swaraj self-rule. You leave this moment knowing that the tide is turning slowly but surely, and once it swells, no empire can hold it back. You step lightly into 1905, the year when the British decide to carve Bengal in two, and you feel the shockwaves ripple through every street, every tea shop, every school, where students suddenly whisper louder than usual. Officially, they say the partition is for administrative convenience to make governance easier, but you can almost see the smirk behind the paperwork because it splits the province along religious lines, Hindu majority west and Muslim majority east. The British think this will weaken the rising nationalism divide and rule at its finest. You stand among the crowds in Calcutta, where protests, swell voices merge, and you sense a fire catching where no one expected it to. Outrage fills the air so thick you could almost taste it. Swadeshi is born here, the movement that tells people to shun British goods, spin their own cloth, and reclaim pride in what is truly theirs. You watch bonfires blaze at dusk, British textiles curling and crackling into ash as people cheer. A small girl clutches a spinning wheel, her hands awkward yet determined, symbolizing a quiet revolution that starts in homes. Even music joins the fight. Tagore writes Amar Sanar Bangla, a song that makes hearts beat faster, and one day this very song will become the national anthem of Bangladesh. You catch yourself smiling poetry as protest songs, as swords. A quirky detail drifts your way. Some British businessmen actually tried disguising their goods as native to avoid boycott, only to be hilariously exposed when labels peeled off in the rain. As the movement spreads, it sparks unity that surprises even its leaders. Hindus and Muslims march side by side, their differences fading in the face of a shared cause. But you also notice cracks, some communal tensions simmer quietly, planted and watered by those who prefer division. Historians still argue whether this partition sowed the seeds of later discord or whether it temporarily united India like never before. For you walking through these rallies, it feels like both are true at once. Unity surging in the short term, but shadows lurking on the horizon. The British, alarmed by the protests, unleash a familiar playbook: censorship, arrests, and the occasional bullet fired into crowds. You pass a group of young revolutionaries, men barely in their 20s, who no longer believe peaceful protest is enough. They smuggle pistols, plot assassinations, and dream of martyrs' glory. In the alleys, pamphlets circulate calling for complete independence, not reforms. You overhear the name Aurobindo Ghose, once a Congress leader, now writing fiery pieces that send chills through colonial officials. Extremists and moderates clash within the nationalist movement, arguing over methods, but both want the same thing: freedom. Meanwhile, the Indian National Congress grows bolder. Its sessions ring with speeches demanding Swaraj, a word that now hangs in the air like incense, sweet, intoxicating, and slightly dangerous. The British respond by tightening their grip, banning meetings and exiling leaders. Yet the more they repress, the more resilient the resistance becomes. You sense the Raj beginning to feel uneasy, as if it knows that ruling India is no longer a walk in the manicured garden. You wander to 1911, where the British, perhaps realizing they've gone too far, reversed the partition of Bengal. The crowd celebrate, but the joy is bittersweet because they've learned a vital lesson: pressure works. It's like realizing that the towering fortress of the empire isn't made of stone, but of brittle glass that cracks when struck hard enough. At the same time, the capital shifts from Calcutta to Delhi, a move that feels symbolic, a throne relocating to stand closer to the pulse of power. The new city will rise with grand boulevards and colonial pomp, but also with whispers of rebellion running underneath its foundations. Through all of this, Gandhi is still on the periphery, quietly experimenting with his philosophy in South Africa. The nationalist struggle has not yet found its spiritual leader, but the groundwork is ready. You leave Bengal's smoldering fires knowing that this movement has done more than protest a partition. It has awakened a new confidence, a belief that Indians can push back and win. And like a match struck in darkness, the glow of this awakening will soon spread far beyond Bengal, lighting the way for the next phase of the struggle. You step barefoot into the 1920s, the sound of waves lapping against a quiet shore, greeting your ears as the sun rises over the Arabian Sea. This is where Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, no longer just a lawyer, but now called the Mahatma, begins to lead a movement unlike any the British have faced before. You walk alongside him as he picks up a fistful of salt and lets it crumble between his fingers, an act so simple yet so defiant that it makes empires tremble. This is the Salt March of 1930, a 240-mile journey from Sabarmati to the village of Dandi, where thousands join barefoot and determined to break the salt laws that force Indians to buy heavily taxed British salt. You taste the salt on your tongue and realize that this isn't just about a mineral, it's about dignity, about saying enough without firing a single bullet. The march begins with a few dozen followers and swells into thousands. Villagers greet the procession with water and flowers. Old women bless Gandhi. Children walk beside him with sticks too big for their hands. You hear British officials scoff. At first, how can salt threaten an empire? But as cameras flash, as newspapers across the world print pictures of an old man defying the Raj, you sense the tide turning. Historians still argue whether the Salt March was more symbolic than practical, but symbols are powerful, and this one cuts deeper than any weapon. A quirky tidbit: British soldiers ordered to arrest protesters sometimes found themselves hesitating because the marchers simply stood there calm and unarmed, making violence look like the empire's shame, not its strength. Civil disobedience spreads like monsoon rain, soaking every corner of India. People boycott British goods, refuse to pay taxes, picket liquor shops, and fill prisons willingly, as if jail itself becomes a badge of honor. You walk past cells where leaders sing songs instead of crying, turning punishment into protest. Women step into the movement with unprecedented force. Sarojini Naidu leads marches. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay sells salt illegally. Countless unnamed women organize in villages, proving that this is not just a men's fight, but a nation's awakening. The British crack down hard, arresting Gandhi and thousands of others, yet every arrest only strengthens the movement's spirit. Meanwhile, the Indian National Congress adopts the goal of Purna Swaraj, complete independence, declared on January 26, 1930, with the tricolour flag unfurled under open sky. You stand under that flag as it flutters against colonial winds, feeling a mix of pride and anticipation. The British respond with the familiar rhythm of repression: bans, censorship, batons, bullets. The protests are met with violence, like at Dharasana, where peaceful marchers are beaten so savagely that even international journalists shudder. Yet the protesters do not fight back, and the world begins to see the British Empire not as noble rulers, but as aggressors cracking under the weight of their own brutality. Amid all this, the British attempt dialogue. Round-table conferences are held in London, where Indian leaders sit across from imperial officials, sipping tea while negotiating the future of a nation. Gandhi travels to Britain in his simple dhoti, walking among suited politicians, and the contrast speaks louder than words. Talks stall as expected because the empire is not ready to let go, and India is not ready to compromise on freedom. You can almost hear the frustration in every closed door, every failed meeting. The 1930s bring both hope and hardship. The Great Depression hits India hard, farmers suffer, and taxes weigh heavier than ever. Communal tensions also simmer. Hindu and Muslim communities, once united in protest, begin to drift apart as political leaders clash over representation and identity. You overhear debates in Congress sessions, fiery speeches from Muhammad Ali Jinnah warning of Muslim interests being sidelined. The idea of two nations begins to germinate, faint but real, like a storm cloud forming far away. Historians still argue whether these divisions were inevitable or nurtured by colonial policies that thrived on keeping communities at odds. Through it all, Gandhi remains the moral heartbeat of the movement, even when he is imprisoned or fasting to quell violence. You watch him spin cotton daily, promoting simplicity as resistance, turning a spinning wheel into a weapon sharper than swords. Children learn to spin, adults wear khadi proudly, and even the elite trade silk for homespun cloth, showing solidarity in threads. The British, puzzled and irritated, try to suppress the movement, but cannot crush the idea of independence now alive in millions of minds. As the 1930s close, the Raj feels both solid and fragile, like a fortress with cracks hidden under layers of whitewash. You leave the salt march behind, but its salty taste lingers on your lips, a reminder that freedom can begin with something as small as a grain of salt, and once it begins, it spreads everywhere, unstoppable. You step into the 1940s, where the world is at war again, and India, whether it wants to or not, is dragged into the whirlwind. The British declare India a participant in World War II without even asking its leaders, a move that leaves Congress seething. You see Indian soldiers, millions of them, marching off to fight in Europe, Africa and Asia under the Union, jack their bravery earning medals while their homeland still wears chains. The contradiction hangs heavy like smoke in the air, fighting for freedom abroad while living under occupation at home. You hear the British argue that independence must wait until after the war, but to many Indians this is just another excuse. The Indian National Congress responds with the Quit India movement in 1942, a call that echoes like thunder. The British must leave now. You stand among the crowds on August 8th as Gandhi gives his famous "Do or Die" speech, his frail voice carrying the weight of a nation's impatience. The next morning, leaders are arrested, Congress is banned, and chaos erupts. Protests flare across the country. Railways burn, police stations are attacked, and the Raj responds with brutal force: machine guns, mass arrests, public flogging. You see posters torn from walls, rebels hiding in fields, and prisons overflowing. Historians still argue whether the movement's failure to achieve immediate independence was a setback or a necessary spark that burned away any remaining illusions about British rule. While Congress leaders languish in jail, another figure rises in the shadows: Subhas Chandra Bose. You catch him slipping away from house arrest later, hearing of his daring alliance with Axis powers to form the Indian National Army, INA. His troops march under the slogan "Chalo Delhi," and even though the INA is ultimately defeated, the idea that Indians could fight militarily for their own freedom stirs something deep. British officials, rattled by the loyalty many soldiers still feel toward Bose's vision, realize their grip is weakening in places they once thought unshakable. Meanwhile, the Muslim League under Muhammad Ali Jinnah gains momentum, demanding a separate homeland for Muslims. You attend their rallies where green flags wave and voices chant for Pakistan. The British, ever skilled at exploiting divisions, quietly note how the Congress League rivalry could be used to their advantage. The dream of one India begins to crack, and you feel that crack widening with each political negotiation. The concept of partition, once unthinkable, now lurks in every conversation like an uninvited guest. Wartime famine strikes Bengal in 1943, and you walk through streets where hunger is a ghost that haunts every doorway. 3 million die while rice rots in storage, and British wartime policies divert food elsewhere. The stench of starvation mixes with the anger of survival. Churchill dismisses Indian suffering with cold indifference, and you sense that even the most loyal subjects are now questioning the morality of empire. A quirky, haunting detail sticks with you. In some villages, people resorted to eating grass and leaves, while British soldiers dined comfortably in nearby cantonments. By 1945, the war ends, but Britain is exhausted, its empire stretched thin, and its economy in ruins. You hear the footsteps of soldiers returning home, some with medals, some with scars, all with questions. Across India, whispers of independence grow louder, no longer just the dream of elites, but the demand of the masses. When the trials of INA soldiers are held in 1945, Protests erupt in their support, uniting Indians across communities in outrage against the colonial government. Even in the British Parliament, voices start admitting what was once unthinkable: the empire in India may not last much longer. You watch as Gandhi, released from prison, calls again for peace and unity, while Jinnah pushes harder for Pakistan and Nehru navigates between hope and despair. Negotiations resume, but now the British are negotiating from weakness, not strength. The Second World War has shifted the global balance, and India's independence is no longer a question of if, but when. Yet you sense the storm is not over. It is only changing shape. The next steps will not just determine independence, but will redraw the map and the very soul of the land. As you leave this decade's battlefield of ideas, famine and fire, the Raj feels like an old house with termites chewing at its beams. It still stands, but every gust of wind, every protest, every speech, every soldier's memory makes it creak louder. The war is over, but the final chapter of empire is about to be written, and you are walking straight toward the page where history will turn. You walk into 1947's long shadow, but before you reach that fateful year, you stand in the halls of negotiations, where the empire's future in India is being debated like a chess match played on the edge of a cliff. The British, battered by war, no longer have the appetite or the resources to hold the subcontinent by sheer force. You watch Prime Minister Clement Attlee announce that British rule in India will end by June 1948, a deadline meant to be orderly but ticking like a bomb. Lord Louis Mountbatten arrives as the last viceroy, dashing in uniform yet carrying the heavy burden of ending 2 centuries of colonial dominance. You see him smile often, but behind the smile lies urgency. He knows the empire's time is almost up. Negotiations are tense. You stand in smoke-filled rooms where Gandhi pleads for unity, Nehru envisions a secular democracy, and Jinnah insists on a separate homeland for Muslims. The Congress and the Muslim League argue not just over territory, but over identity itself. You can almost hear the walls absorbing the voices of leaders whose every word now shapes millions of lives. Historians still argue whether partition was inevitable or whether a stronger effort could have kept India united. For you listening to the heated exchanges, it feels like the tide of division is already too strong to hold back. Mountbatten, pressured by mounting violence and British impatience, decides to advance the deadline to August 1947, cutting almost a year from the transition. You feel the chill of haste in every decision. Boundaries will be drawn in a matter of weeks by a man named Cyril Radcliffe, who has never set foot in India before. Imagine that, a stranger with a map and a pen deciding where millions will live or die. A quirky detail: Radcliffe reportedly refused to return to India after witnessing the bloodshed his lines triggered, claiming he couldn't bear the guilt. While political leaders negotiate, the streets outside boil with tension. Communal riots erupt in Bengal, Bihar and Punjab, each incident feeding the next like fire, leaping from roof to roof. Trains arrive in stations filled not with passengers, but with bodies, mute testimonies of hate unleashed. You see British officials standing helpless, their authority eroding faster than the ink dries on their agreements. The Raj, once feared, now seems like a brittle shell cracking under the weight of chaos. Amid this storm, Gandhi walks barefoot through villages, trying to quell violence with his presence alone. He fasts, prays and pleads for peace, but even his saintly aura cannot stop the tide. Nehru, increasingly seen as India's future leader, focuses on governance and the mechanics of statehood, while Jinnah, frail yet resolute, secures the creation of Pakistan as the homeland he has fought for. The British, eager to leave sign papers, hold ceremonies and prepare to hand over power, even as the ground shakes beneath them. You stand on August 14, 1947, as Pakistan is born, its first sunrise filled with both celebration and fear. The next night, August 15th, you watch India raise its tricolour. At midnight, Nehru's voice ringing in the Constituent Assembly. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. The words are beautiful, but outside the streets are burning. Refugees pour across new borders, leaving homes, memories and loved ones behind. Partition, the solution to political deadlock, becomes one of the largest human migrations in history and one of the bloodiest. Millions flee, millions suffer, hundreds of thousands die. Even as Mountbatten hosts farewell ceremonies with royal grace, you sense the empire leaving not in triumph, but in retreat. British flags and lowered troops sail away, and the Union Jack becomes just a memory in the land it once ruled. Yet in their departure, they leave behind lines carved into earth, and hearts are like wounds that will take generations to heal. As you step back from the negotiations and into the streets where freedom and tragedy collide, you realize the price of independence is staggering. India is free, but at a cost measured in tears and blood. The clock strikes midnight, and history turns its page, but the ink is still wet, and the cries of partition echo in the night. You stand on the edge of August 1947, watching dawn break over a land newly free yet deeply scarred. The sun rises over fields where farmers still plow as they did yesterday, but borders have shifted overnight, slicing through villages, families and histories. You see columns of people, Hindus and Sikhs, trudging west into India, Muslims heading east into Pakistan. They carry whatever they can on their heads in carts on their backs, but many carry only memories. The air is thick with dust, smoke and fear. Trains chug along these new lines, but too often they arrive not with jubilant passengers, but silent cargo carriages filled with bodies, a nightmare no one can wake from. Partition, meant to solve problems instead, unleashes violence so ferocious that words falter trying to describe it. You walk through Punjab, where mobs roam with swords and torches, where neighbors who once shared meals now turn on each other with rage, fanned by fear. Women bear the heaviest suffering, kidnapped, assaulted, their stories whispered, but rarely told. Historians still argue whether the British withdrawal caused this chaos, or whether deep-rooted animosities erupted on their own, but you, standing in the midst of it, know blame is tangled and pain is universal. Quirky tragic stories surface too. In some villages, people dressed up scarecrows as guards to bluff attackers, hoping to save their homes through shadows. Even as rivers run red in other corners, humanity flickers against the darkness. You see Sikh families shelter Muslim neighbors, Hindu villagers hiding Muslim children, acts of courage that defy the madness. Gandhi walks barefoot again, this time in Calcutta, fasting to stop the killings. Miraculously, riots cease, where he appears proof that one man's will can still sway hearts, at least briefly. You watch him, frail yet unbroken, and you understand why even his enemies call him Mahatma. Meanwhile, in Delhi, the celebrations unfold. Flags wave, crowds cheer. Drums beat as Nehru declares India's tryst with destiny. You stand under the tricolour fluttering at the Red Fort, the sky alive with fireworks. The joy is real, but it's a joy mingled with grief, because freedom has come hand in hand with partition's wounds. Jinnah too delivers speeches in Karachi promising Pakistan a fresh start, yet his own health falters. His dream only partly realized before illness claims him a year later. You wander through refugee camps where tents flap in monsoon winds, where people start over with nothing but hope. Families search for lost members, often finding graves instead. Children grow up too quickly, their lullabies replaced by the sound of trains and the cries of separation. The new government struggled to cope, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the human tide. The British, having exited with ceremonies and signatures, watch from afar as their hurried partition leaves behind chaos they no longer own. Even in this darkness, seeds of resilience sprout. You see volunteers distributing food, doctors working tirelessly, artists capturing the sorrow and strength of the times. Writers pen stories that future generations will read and weep over. Filmmakers record images that refuse to fade. The land, though bleeding, refuses to die. It begins to heal unevenly, painfully, but it heals. By the end of 1947, the borders settle at least on maps, and two nations take their first steps into independence. India, despite its losses, stands tall, its constitution in the making, its leaders dreaming of democracy, science, industry, and progress. Pakistan too begins its journey, its people building a new homeland from scratch. You realize that independence is not a finish line, but a beginning one, written in both triumph and tragedy. As you watch the refugee trails fade into the horizon, you feel the enormity of what has been won and what has been lost. Independence has arrived, but it comes wrapped in both the pride of liberation and the sorrow of division. The land is free, yet its heart is split. You take a deep breath, sensing the weight of this moment, knowing the final step is yet to come, the moment where hope outgrows pain and a new era finally begins. You step into the days immediately after independence, where the air is still heavy with smoke from burning villages, yet somewhere in that haze the fragrance of new beginnings drifts. India has woken to freedom, but the morning light reveals a landscape divided, hearts torn by partition. You walk through Delhi, where the Red Fort stands proud under the tricolour, and you hear Nehru's voice echo in memory. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. The words are still ringing, but outside the ceremonial halls, the city is tense. Refugees flood in from Punjab, their faces etched with exhaustion, and the government scrambles to house and feed millions. You see camps springing up, overnight aid arriving too slowly, and yet amid all this, the new nation begins to function. Ministries work, trains run, schools reopen. Life insists on moving forward. You walk to a quiet corner where Gandhi sits cross-legged, his presence as calm as a still pond in a storm. He is not at the celebrations. He has chosen instead to be among the victims of violence, fasting to stop the bloodshed. His eyes, tired yet unwavering, seem to hold both pride and sorrow. Pride for the freedom won, sorrow for the price paid. His efforts bring temporary peace in Calcutta and Delhi, but the hatred unleashed by partition is not easily silenced. Even so, his non-violence still inspires, his spinning wheel still turns, and his prayers still rise like smoke toward the sky. The new government under Nehru's leadership faces enormous challenges. You see him walking through corridors filled with stacks of papers, maps, and urgent decisions. A secular democratic republic must be built from fragments. Princely states need to be integrated, and you watch Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, the Iron Man of India, methodically bring hundreds of kingdoms into the fold, some through persuasion, some through force. The Indian Constitution is drafted, a monumental document led by B.R. Ambedkar, who ensures it speaks of equality, justice, and liberty for all. Yet the ink is barely dry when reality tests its promises. Poverty remains widespread, communal wounds still bleed, and the task of uniting such diversity feels as vast as the Himalayas. Across the new border, Pakistan too struggles. Refugees pour into Karachi and Lahore. Its administration hurriedly assembled, its economy fragile. Jinnah, now Governor-General, tries to steady the ship, but his health fails, and within a year he is gone, leaving Pakistan searching for direction. Both nations, born from the same soil, begin separate journeys shaped by shared pain and different dreams. Then in January 1948, a bullet shatters the fragile calm. You hear the gunshot in Delhi as Gandhi falls, his last words, "Hey Ram," whispered into the stunned silence. The nation mourns not just a leader, but its conscience. Crowds weep openly, Hindus and Muslims together united in grief for the man who had fought so hard to keep them united in life. Historians still argue what India might have been had Gandhi lived longer, but you can feel in that moment how his absence leaves a void no one can truly fill. Even with its wounds, India slowly rises. The years ahead will see wars, famines, reforms, and revolutions, but the foundation laid in 1947 remains. You walk past farmers tilling the land, students studying under dim lamps, women stepping into public life with new confidence, and scientists dreaming of rockets and reactors. The nation is still fragile, but it breathes, it hopes, it grows. It celebrates festivals with renewed spirit, it debates politics with noisy passion, and it holds on to the belief that freedom, though costly, is worth every sacrifice. As night falls on this chapter, you stand once more at the Red Fort, the flag swaying gently in the breeze. It flutters not just as a piece of cloth, but as a reminder of resilience, courage, and the long road from subjugation to self-determination. You realize the journey is far from over. Independence is not an endpoint, but the first step in an endless struggle to stay true to the ideals that birthed it. The British Empire is gone, but the people's spirit remains unbroken and unbowed. And so you take a slow breath, letting the story settle like dust after a storm. India has gained independence after decades of British rule, and though the scars remain, so does the strength to heal, to build, and to dream. Now let the noise fade to a whisper. The chants, the speeches, the clamor of freedom, they drift away like echoes across a vast plain. You find yourself standing in a quiet field under a starlit sky, the chaos of history replaced by the hush of night. The air is warm and a soft breeze brushes against your face, carrying the scent of earth after rain. You can almost hear crickets chirping, a dog barking in the distance, life going on as it always does. The struggle, the triumph, the heartbreak, all of it settles into a calm memory like ripples smoothing out on a once stormy pond. You picture the flag still waving, its colors muted under moonlight, no longer a symbol of struggle but of peace. Villages sleep. Cities hum softly, and somewhere perhaps an old spinning wheel turns, slowly reminding you that great change often starts with the smallest motion. You breathe in slow and deep, and with every breath the weight of the story eases off your shoulders. The people of that time have passed, but their voices remain, their courage woven into the fabric of today. As you exhale, the stars seem to shine brighter, guiding you gently toward rest. The road to freedom was long and winding, but it ended in hope, and hope is a gentle place to stay. Let it cradle you now, let it soften your thoughts. Let the story fade into dreams where time is kind and the night is endless, is